So hi everyone, Marco here. In case you don't know me, I'm not Brad. I have stolen his name, and that's absolutely fine. We're waiting for our two other guest hosts as well. So start piling up your questions so that we can get to the Q&A. So welcome to this BattleCon Unleashed Kickstarter Q&A for this Saturday 4 p.m. And we're going to be talking about balance with our lead balancer, Andero, also known as Daniel Honig, as our audience proxy, Laura Levito.
Hi.
Hey.
Can you hear me
Hey,
okay?
chat. Okay. Yeah, I'm doing not so bad. I'm waiting for Daniel, and it's going to be a fun time. I just need to know whether or not people are hearing us in chat. It's
Can you
Daniel.
see me? Can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi, Daniel. Are you?
Hey,
are
how's
you
it going?
okay?
Yep.
All right, that's wonderful. So people can hear us all fine. How are both of my wonderful co-hosts this early morning, for me at least?
I think it's a little less early for the two of us.
Yeah, it is. You're wrong, Marco.
I'm wrong?
You're wrong.
Are you sure that's how time zones work?
Yes, it is. Hi, I'm good.
Okay.
How are you? How's everybody?
Good.
Good. How's it going? All right, so we have a couple minutes till we start in full.
Yeah, we're just waiting for more questions, actually.
I'm like super distracted by your light up microphone right now.
What, mine?
Yes.
Why is it a light up microphone?
I have no idea.
I'm so jealous.
What?
It's super fancy. I like it.
It was very inexpensive, but it works well, so I'll take it.
I dig it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So while we're waiting for questions, we can talk a few things about like who we are, what we do, right? While we're waiting for some questions.
Yeah.
So I think this is Laura's second time on stream, and this is also Daniel's second time on stream.
Yeah,
right?
it's definitely mine.
For Unleashed, yeah.
Yeah, for Unleashed, definitely. So Laura, what do you do?
So for Unleashed, I did all the Kickstarter graphics and such. The big box for Unleashed, I'm designing all of that. What else am I doing on this project? Oh, there's some stretch goal stuff that if we hit it, I'll get to do it. Oh, and I'm doing a set of bases, so the visceral bases are mine. I'm very excited.
Yeah,
for that. That'll be my first official art in BattleCon. So
they're full of viscera?
Yes, full of it. So much blood.
Okay, so
That's how that works.
Yeah, so it's an M17 kind of like base set.
Yeah.
I see. All right, and who's this guy? Who's this other guy? What does he do?
I think I'm on the left of you on my screen, at least.
I think it changes based on...
Yeah, I think it changes.
Here or here?
There, second one. You're right.
Here.
Yeah, there we go. Hey, so
You're above me.
Yeah, I see myself, like, you're over there on my screen.
Perfect.
So, yeah, my name is Daniel Honig. I do the card effect templating and balance design, and mostly I'm in charge of making sure that effects and numbers don't break the game and seem generally reasonable. It's
Which is tough with like 100 and something characters, right?
It's the endless fight against Brad's crazy designs, mostly.
Gaspar.
Gaspar worked out all right, I think.
Yeah, I know, but like he's more of a like. I think that's a question that I want to make very clear right now. Your job isn't just about making sure things are fair and balanced. Your job is also just making sure that things actually just work, right? Like, so to speak, in a video game, your job is to make sure bugs don't happen, right?
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Yeah, because like Gaspar isn't really like broken or overpowered or whatever, right? But you have to fix a lot of stuff to make sure he's actually parsable and working.
I refer a lot of the Gaspar questions to Dan Z. Tyrinkin, because he's sort of our resident Gaspar expert and was in charge of dealing with a lot of that stuff. I was mostly working with the feedback that he and one or two other Gaspar players were giving me, because I'm like the worst Gaspar known to mankind. I'm a terrible player of Gaspar.
Are you sure? You haven't seen? Yeah, that's fair. Laura might be worse. Who knows?
We'll have to find out.
I could take that title from you.
All right. I think we have a few questions piled up already. So let's start. Laura, do you want to display some of the questions, so that Daniel and I can attempt to answer?
Oh, this is a good one. Okay. So Luke asked, what are the kinds of effects that are trickiest to balance?
Ooh.
All right.
Can we show that to the audience? Is that a button?
That.
Yeah, I pushed the show question.
I think Marco may have to do it, or fake Brad may have to do it. All right, there we go. So the kinds of effects that are trickiest to balance are usually the ones that make the opponent feel bad, right? Yeah. They're ones that are, for example, Tannis is playful. She has a style where her ability is she steals stat buffs on the opponent and applies them to herself instead, which is a little bit silly if you're playing someone like, Magdalena, who's getting a bunch of free stats every beat, and now suddenly Tannis has those. So a lot of those effects don't necessarily work right. You'll see that a lot when you have something that's like super matchup skewing. So you can look at Benvir's Runic or Tannis' Playful, which are both power bonus stealers. So if the opponent has a bunch of power bonuses, they suddenly don't work properly, and then that character stomps them. So some of those we've just had to remove or rework to make it a little less one-sided. So in Unleashed, Playful it copies the bonuses instead of fully stealing them, so you at least get to play a little bit. But so those ones where you like remove something from the opponent tend to be hard to balance. But the ones that are probably the hardest to balance but are still okay in the game tend to be ones that are really 50-50 focused. So effects like Alexian's Regal, for example, where it's like if the opponent did thing A, you get a huge benefit. In this case, if they antied their tokens, they get nothing. But if they didn't anti their tokens, it doesn't do anything. So we're generally okay with those. You just kind of have to make sure that they don't feel bad if you miss the guess, right? So Regal is still pretty good stats. It's still, plus power, plus prio, and plus stun guard, even if you don't get the guess right. So cards like that, where it's like it might just feel really awkward, are a pain in the butt to balance usually.
I can only imagine like how you have to deal with stuff like phase on Glenhide, right?
Yeah, so like phase is Glenhide himself has a lot of 50-50s, but phase in particular is fair because the counterplay is pretty obvious unless you're Darius or Anath or someone who just always moves.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. Phase is probably fine.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, phase needs to have that huge counterplay, or else it will be a really bad style in the sense that it's not healthy for game balance, right?
Well, you run into the same issue when you have a style with Ignore Stun Guard, for example, that you can give hit confirm with Drive. So we've always kind of had issues with, for example, Siren Drive on Tatsume, where it's an Ignore Stun Guard Drive. Because once every three, or Hepzibah in general, but like once every 3 beats, the opponent just getting stunned is kind of awkward. So we're still figuring out how exactly we want to deal with those. If you want to, the easy solution is always you make it on hit the opponent has -3 power. That's kind of been the safe Ignore Stun Guard. You just weaken them instead of preventing them from doing anything entirely. But that's sort of still an ongoing discussion for us.
Yeah, stunning is really powerful.
Stunning is good.
Yeah, stunning is good. Stunning is good. Does Laura understand everything we're talking about?
All right, okay, that's good so far.
Well, no, that's funny because what I was actually going to say earlier in that when you got to like, so you said the stuff about effects where you're just removing something from someone, but then all of the other effects when you're balancing that, it seems like it would be really easy to create things that just offer 0 counterplay, or the counterplay is way too easy. If I imagine it's got to be difficult to try to do something where like, okay, we're giving you this opportunity for counterplay, but there's something I can do in response, sort of.
Yeah, there are some characters that have that. For example, Glenhide's phase is probably the best example, where it's if the opponent moved, they take a bunch of damage. If they didn't move, you miss.
Yeah.
So it's pretty obvious in some ways, but you run into situations like with Darius where they're going to move. Or I think E-Access has a plane that makes him move.
Forces both of them to move. Yeah.
Well, I think he has a plane where it collapses move to any space, which forces phase to make him miss, which is a little silly.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
Yeah, things like that.
This is actually it kind of leads into another question. Which one was the one I was looking at? Which is, which character needed the most work to make them balanced yet enjoyable?
By Nate Kurth. All right.
Yeah.
So probably the character that we've done the most work on is Caitlyn, which is part of the whole Caitlyn update blog article that came out, I think, a week and a half ago.
Posting
because
right now.
She wasn't fun to really play against, and she wasn't exactly all that fun to play because her whole character kit was always your opponent doesn't get to play, right? So she had a UA that removed their movement and a bunch of cards that were all basically the same thing, like plus range, no real prio modifier, and mess with positioning. So her whole rework was intended to make her more interesting across the board. The other character that needed the most work, I would say, is actually Evil Hikaru, who we'll be talking about more in a bit, because his whole gimmick was that he was a really good range 1 fighter, but half his cards were basically, if at range 1, opponent doesn't get to play. He had as printed, he had an auto dodge on Evil Water and a auto stun on Evil Earth, and then +3 power with -2 prio if you combine Evil Wind and just punching them, which was a little bit silly. So he got reworked pretty heavily. He's still a range 1 focused character with a lot of mix-up, but you'll be seeing more about him pretty soon.
Yeah, we were writing an article about him, right?
Yeah.
Evil Hikaru is pretty fun. In the end,
he breaks people's brains.
This is after every question.
Every time. Yeah,
every
I
question
check
is going to
time.
end with, Laura, do you understand?
Yeah,
yes,
that's the thing.
like,
that's why we need an audience proxy, because we're not sure, right? Because
Daniel and I could because so balancing is something that's just like kind of magic to me. Like, I'll listen to you talk about this, Daniel, and I'm like, how do you even remember the exact numbers on every card? But you spend so much time doing it that I'm sure it's just like second nature to you. But to me, like, there are so many levels of what you have to consider with it that I'm just like, I will leave that to the people that are good at it.
Also, lots of spreadsheets, tons of spreadsheets.
Well, I do love spreadsheets.
Way too many spreadsheets.
Way too many you people are so organized. I think it just comes with playing the game over 300 something times, right? Like at some point you just remember.
My Google Drive just has a folder called BattleCon that has like 20-something spreadsheets in it.
Wonderful.
Same, but for different reasons. Okay, let's see. Where's this one? I see it on the chat one, but what are the kind of effects that are trickiest to balance? Oh, wait, no, we said that already.
We hit that one. Yep.
Why is it still here? Oh, okay.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I can. If it's grayed out, that means you answered that question.
Yeah, sorry. I was looking at what had the most votes on chat. Votes aren't showing up for me. Ignore me. I'm trash. How do you determine if a character is balanced?
Ooh, the real questions, Daniel.
So,
real talk.
I don't know if there really is an answer to that other than just playing them.
A
lot of the time, there's sort of two questions, right? It's, do they win a reasonable amount of time in general? You know, if they're not too much, not too little. And also, are they actually fun to play against? So, we had a chat with some people about a week ago when we were talking about custom characters, where basically the thing that I look for in a character is what's their game plan and what kind of game plan do they want their opponent to take. So look at a character like Mikhail, right? So he's super heavyweight. He has a drawback UA because his styles do 1 billion damage. And his game plan is basically force them to range and hit them really hard and trade a lot.
And trade all the time.
Trade up a lot, specifically. And that's what he does, and that's a reasonable game plan. And his opponent's game plan, so the sort of counterplay for him, is stay close to him because he has 2 cards that are amazing at range, and try not to trade. If you hit him hard. If not, just don't bother hitting him. And those are things that any character can do. When you start running into situations, like we had a question today, which was, so Gar's whole thing is that she gets variant bases. You know, is it okay for effects like counter or some of Evil Hikaru stuff to work on her? There's weird character-specific stuff going around there, and we sort of need to look at that. But really, to tell if a character is balanced, if any character can play against them and feel okay because there's some kind of, generic, reasonable game plan. If you can't stay away from or can't get in close to Mikhail because you're a ranger like Rookuk or Welsi or someone, you can probably contest him at a distance and it's still fine. So as long as your game plan and their game plan don't just totally wipe each other out for some weird interaction reason, or if it's not like Eric and he can just shut down the opponent's game plan 80% of the time, they're probably at least reasonably balanced, and then we can do number tuning to, get them in line from there.
Do you feel like with BattleCon Online being a thing that's functioning now and collecting data through that, are there certain numbers or stats that you look at in that to kind of help determine balance, aside from just like outright win rate? Like if a character is winning 90% of the time, obviously something is a little off, right? But like, what do you kind of look for with the stats that we're able to with the stats we're able to collect through BattleCon Online now?
Yeah, so I can see win rates. I know that the win rates are a little bit tough to use because they tend to skew heavily towards newbie-friendly characters. Like for a while, Cadenza just had crazy win rates because new players were getting stomped or stomping with him, which is fine. I mean, I can understand to an extent when you have a wrench thrown in the works there, and I think there's a question about that. But at the same time, a lot of what we do handle is player feedback. So with BCO running, we have a lot more players playing the game, which is great. And so a lot more players can chat. And that way we can sort of use that info to go from there, see what people think is strong, and see if players are all complaining about one specific thing, it's worth taking a look at. And some characters are just going to be less fun to play against or more control focused. So, I mean, I wouldn't expect everyone to be thrilled about playing, sometimes you get stun-locked by Schecter, or sometimes you get stun-locked by Marmalay even, or get totally suppressed out. And that's fine, as long as it's not a thing that happens all the time and it doesn't feel too bad. You have to feel like there's something you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like, people tend to put too much weight on win rates. You know what I mean? It's like when it comes to the data that we collect, because I think at the end of the day, like you pointed it out, qualitative data tends to be way better than the quantitative data when it comes to balancing. Because ultimately, it's a game about feeling, right? Like it's a game about how you feel when you play the character. Like the hard win rates sometimes don't matter. Like especially like for Cadenza, right? Or characters like that. I guess we could move to that question.
Yeah.
Right? How do you deal with characters like Cadenza? Well balanced but dominate newer players. Like I was pointing out, right? It's like if we listen to every newbie who just went, "Oh, Cadenza's broken," like that wouldn't work. Like the thing about it is like people feel vindicated because we nerfed Cadenza in a patch or two, right? Like we gave him 2 nerfs to battery and hydraulic specifically, and people feel vindicated. It's like, yes, he was broken, but like he really wasn't. And the real reason we did that balancing was more for game feel and to make those people feel a little bit less bad. Because quite frankly, Cadenza was like average at best. And then now that we did those nerfs, he's actually a little bit below average in the higher levels of play. But he's evened out in the lower levels of play. So like, how do you deal with that? Like, what made you make that decision that like you were like, it's okay to just overall nerf Cadenza?
So one thing that is definitely going on in
BattleCon Online,
in paper BattleCon, is that a lot of the characters that really crushed Cadenza, for example, Lysandra, Thessala, and Hepzibah, were all kind of on the radar as problems already. So it was a concern that, with all of the anti-heavies getting toned down a little bit, Melandrax and Tannis and the like also, that Hepzibah and, Ko, if they start dropping out of the field, that Cadenza starts, being too strong. Though his matchup against Sagas is a problem. So as long as Sagas is still good, he might have issues. But basically, we're okay, at least I certainly am, making Cadenza an average character, if that's what it comes down to. The hydraulic nerf specifically is that hydraulic is kind of his easy-to-play style. It's not, he doesn't have the range issues that Clockwork does. It still trades at +3. It's just a really good card. So bringing down battery and hydraulic kind of made his easiest plays that weren't Clockwork a little bit worse. And those were also things he relied on in high-level play. So all things considered, Cadenza is probably average now. He definitely got hurt a lot by the nerfs. And I think, it is mostly because especially newer players just felt terrible playing against him. So, I don't know. I don't know if there really is a solid answer to that. It's just, he felt awful to play against. and he still does have the power to play well. And for some matchups and for some player experiences, we can live with Cadenza, not being the top of the tournament circuit, being the strongest competitor.
Thank you. I think that's something I want to mention right now, because as a community guy, I hear a lot of feedback, not from just newbies, but a lot of people who supposedly have hundreds of games under their belts. And it's that they not constantly, but many of them point to the fact that certain characters, like, they ask us to buff certain characters because they're not as competitively viable as Luke or like Schecter or like unnerfed Hepzibah or like Tatsumi or stuff like that. I think that's something we have to point out in game balance, right? Like, not every character is supposedly like, we don't make every character so that they're competitively the best one. You know what I mean? It's like we don't balance everyone so they're all freaking Lysandra. That's not the point, right? Like, those characters are really, really strong and actually broken. So we can't really make them all that strong, right? So whenever people's comparison point is like, oh, why is Hikaru like this, and why can't he be as good as Luke or Berman or Schecter in BattleCon Online? And the real answer to that is just, well, it's because those are the best characters in the game, and like they're probably gonna get nerfed at some point. Like that's the big deal, right?
It's nice to have a tournament circuit where you have as many viable characters as possible, but there are some characters that either are super disruptive, either because they tend to be very 50-50s focused. Like, Alexian is a solid character, but Alexian is a character who his counterplay is kind of awkward for the opponent. And as a result, he tends to struggle a bit in some matchups, especially when the opponent gets really good. And that's fine. He's newbie friendly, and he can play at high levels, but I wouldn't, I don't know if I would see him a ton at the top tables. So I could see it. Characters like Hikaru and Cadenza, the sort of quote unquote big dumb heavyweight characters that just hit really hard and tend to struggle positioning wise, they're fine, but in a game, especially like BattleCon, that tends to be skewed a little bit more towards control, because control characters tend to be a little bit safer to play and more consistent. I just don't expect to see them quite as much. But at the same time, as long as they can handle themselves and you're not, going to be heavily disadvantaged if they're your main and you bring them to a tournament, it's pretty much okay in my books. Because a lot of those characters, when they do get too good, they're just not fun to play against.
Yeah, so that actually kind of leads into another question that I was going to pull from Nate, which is, are you okay with characters having some extremely bad matchups as long as overall they have a good shot at winning against most opponents?
So we do what we can. Auto win or auto lose matchups are not great.
No.
And we'd really like to remove those.
Yeah.
And the main concern is there's two interactions that tend to be a problem. Either the archetypes tend to run into an issue. For example, dedicated rangers versus like amazing range controllers, characters that just know where they want to be and are really good at getting there. For example, Hakech versus Ryukyuk has always sort of been the generic one, because Ryukyuk's whole thing is that he wants to be at range 2+, and Hakech's ability is that whenever he's at range 3, he can immediately teleport to range 1.
Oh, that feels bad.
And in some ways, it's not as bad as you might think, because
it's actually a decent matchup.
Ryukyuk can play the range 2 game really well and needs to. But you're going to run into issues in those situations. Welsi and Trias, have similar fights to fight against Hakech. Trias versus Hakech is actually super weird and interesting because he's so good at making range. But those are an issue. But sort of more problematic is when you have a character UA that interacts badly with another UA. So, for example, sort of the one that has been brought up fairly often is Benvir, whose ability is that he has a lot of style control and the ability to cancel enemy heavyweight abilities and to disrupt enemy styles, versus Mikhail, who relies super heavily on his styles and is, kind of a counterattacker. So you run into this weird situation where Benvir can rotate, like, ignore soak and stun guard, return enemy style to their hand, and return enemy style to their hand. just kind of in perpetuity. So Mikhail could never use his styles. And there's some things that you can do about that. You can make Benvir. You can lower the priority on Devastating. Is something or on Destruction that's been talked about a little bit on his +0, +1/+1, Ignore Soak, and Stun Guard.
Nerf Devastating. Don't nerf it again.
No, Destruction, not Devastating.
Yeah, I know. I was kidding.
And also, Mikhail does have much better range control because he can actually play at ranges less than 2. He can play at actually ranges greater than 2. So, there's some things that are going on there, but those are the ones that are really hard to balance, where kind of UAs interact weirdly. It's one reason that I really am concerned about Sagas for game health in general, because his whole thing is that he copies enemy abilities or removes enemy abilities. And so there's a ton of corner cases that just play badly, in my experience with him. So, I don't know. He was banned for a while. He got unbanned when people sort of hashed out the rules questions with him. He may be rebanned if his good matchups end up being way too feels bad and oppressive for the opponent. Mm-hmm. Don't play Sagas versus Cadenza. It's terrible.
Yeah, for Cadenza.
It's
such a bad matchup. Like, I think it's also very interesting to note that it's also really hard to balance stuff when it comes to control versus people who want range, or a specific range to be more exact, right? Like, I think, and not just control as in like it's a control character, like Tatsumi is a control character. I'm talking about people with the ability, like this is a big mixture of just everything we hate, right? People who say you can't play versus people who need to play a specific thing. Mm. Like that's the worst thing. Like some obvious examples are when you're like against somebody like Seth, and Seth just tells you, hey, you can't play like these 4 attacks or else you lose. Mm. And you're against a character who only has 3 available attacks. You know what I mean? Like you're at range 4 against Seth and you're Hikaru, and then you just insta lose that deep no matter what you do.
A lot of
the worst example.
Sorry.
Yeah?
A lot of our changes have sort of been made to try and reduce card lock a bit. So, for example, things like Mikhail's being able to retreat 1 on Apocalyptic have helped a lot with that, where it's harder to find yourself in a situation where your cards just don't work. The worst of that has always been styles with +2 min range. They just play badly in general, unless you're a character that's really, really good at getting to range 3+, and also the opponent is bad at, staying out of range 3+.
Yeah.
So, for example, probably the best example of this is Kalistar's Volcanic style. So Volcanic on Kalistar is, in human form especially, her best mobility card. It's got end of beat, teleport anywhere, which is great.
Yeah.
But it has also, in printed, not in BCO, +2 to 4 range. And she's a ranger, so she has good tools for that. But she ran into this issue where her only ability to get to range 3+ was either you dodge out, which always felt kind of weird. You use Blazing to run away, which risked being stunned out. Or you burst and hope they don't drive. So a lot of the time it just didn't work, and so it just got paired with dodge a lot, so you could use the end of beat reposition. And this basically meant that she, because of her whole ignition and flare gimmick, just was always down 2 styles, basically, which just felt awful. Yeah. So
it is.
Reducing the min range on Volcanic to +1 to 3 so that you could actually play it at range 2, where she's much better at being outside range 2, or being at range 2+ than at 3+, like most people are, meant that, she suddenly got a lot more flexible, because suddenly you have an extra style, which is super helpful.
An actual card to play? What are you talking about? That's
it's good to have cards. Cards are nice.
Yeah, it's good to have cards. Yeah, I think the worst matchup, like you mentioned, like Banevir versus Mikhail. There's also like the literal unwinnable matchup with Voko versus Zamasal.
Right, it's a UA interaction again, or sort of a character playstyle interaction. He needs to advance a lot. Voko has a movement block. Those don't work well. Or Zamasal has movement block. Those don't work well together.
Yeah, and 4 out of 5 of Voko's cards have min range +1 or +2.
Yeah, Voko is also not great, but we're dealing with that. There's an article on that. We fixed it.
There's an article on it. We buffed Voco. New Voco actually doesn't insta lose that matchup anymore. Just for the chat, it's so bad that if Voco played all of his attacks face up, Zamasal would still win.
Oh,
yeah, we tested that.
Sorry, if Zamasal played all of his attacks face up, Voco would still lose.
I think we determined that Voco has literally no answers to open the gate.
Yeah, like Zamasal can just I don't know, what's it called, like dodge in with like the yellow style that gives him haste, and then he just at that point it's like, okay, Voco loses or something.
So with something like that, right? With the example of there's this character, their UA is all based around this, and then there's this other character and their UA is all based around this. How do you choose which one you mess with? Like you said, Mikhail and Benvir.
Benvir.
So like, how do you make that decision?
Usually the one that is more niche is the one that ends up getting changed. So, for example, if Mikhail works against every character in the game except Benvir, it often means that the problem is that we have to look at something on Benvir's side. And if there's absolutely no way to deal with it, which is possible, I don't know if there's anything quite yet, then you have to sort of tweak both, right? Either you look at something. I'm trying to figure out a specific example. So one possibility,
like Kadath, right?
Yeah,
Kadath versus Eligor is a good example, right?
Yeah. So Kadath, his whole thing is that he wants to control enemy position and he wants to make them slow so he can go fast and hit them. He doesn't hit that hard. Eligor's whole thing is that he's a really good counterattacker. He's got amazing positioning control and he wants to be slow. So you end up in a situation where you put the gate trap next to Eligor and then he just doesn't care. And
actually, he likes it. That's the problem. He wants it.
Yeah.
He wants the gate trap to be next.
So the main change that was done there was giving the ignore soak on snare and the +2 power on gate trap hit, because then he at least has a little bit more ability to play around Eligor's pairs. Mm-hmm. But even with that, it's still going to be favored for Eligor generally, and that's fine. We can live with matchups that are favored as long as both players get to play and feel like they get to play, and the matchup isn't just a total wash, is what we want.
Okay, I think this relates to the next question. I'm sorry, Laura. Is that okay?
Which one?
This one.
That's the one.
If the character is clearly broken. Yeah. Hey, great minds think like us. If a character is clearly broken, do you prioritize bringing their stats or abilities in line, even if it will make them uninteresting to play? How do you keep a character's uniqueness while reining in the really bonkers abilities?
So I think the best example for this is if you look at the Voco article and you look at, I think it's Metal, the style that has like 1 billion lines of text right now, is basically the goal of the game is to have interesting characters. And if there's something that's just way out of line, we still want to make it fun. So if it's out of line in a way that means that the opponent just doesn't get to do anything, it's a reasonably balanced ability, and we can change it with stats so there's maybe some counterplay, or it's just way, way out of line, it tends to get reworked into something that's interesting but different, which is kind of the harder solution, but often the better solution. If we can solve the problem by, shaving a power or a prio off somewhere, or in serious circumstances a range, then we'll lean towards that. But typically, if an ability is like really problematic, you'll either add some sort of conditional limit to it, or change it into something that's easier to work with.
Yeah,
but
I think you're right there, right? We also released the Joel article, which basically talks about this, where it goes like, the point is not to have a balanced character. The point is to have a fun character who's balanced.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like the character being balanced doesn't make them fun. It never makes them fun. They have to be fun first, balanced second. Because at the end of the day, if you wanted a completely balanced character, you could just play like Statman. Vanilla Ice Statman. He has perfectly balanced cards, but he just has stats everywhere. It's like, it's not fun. At the end of the day. So I think it's better to make somebody interesting. Like Joel, for example, like a lot of his cards ended up being changed, not because they were particularly problematic, but it was just because the power budget was skewed in such a way that every Joel game played the same. Yeah. And that's not fun.
Yep. So speaking of that, if you want to pop up that question about starting positions that just showed up in the Q&A a little bit ago.
Can Laura read it for us?
Yeah. So was the change to starting positions due to balance issues? Or did any characters need a balance change because of the change to starting position?
So the change to starting positions is kind of a segue off of this, because in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't really, any matchup where the starting positions don't define the rest of the match necessarily. You can still get to those positions. But a lot of the time, the characters that tended to suffer against control and the characters that were kind of worse were the characters that wanted to be close and stay close. So, and the characters that tended to be really strong were the ones that were range agnostic or the ones that could really disrupt enemy movement. So overall, the changed starting positions actually nerfed a lot of the best characters and buffed a lot of the worst characters, just kind of by letting the close range characters play more. In that case, yes, it was super helpful. Do some characters need a balance change because of it? I would actually say no, because any character that really wanted to be at range 4 tends to have tools to get there. And the characters that were hugely buffed by it tended to be a little worse in general, kind of on average anyways. Because if you could easily get to range 2 and you wanted to be there, you were probably already good. If you, were at range 2 and could easily get to range 4, you're also probably already good. If you're at range 4 and really need to get to range 1 and just had no way to do it, then you need the buff from the new starting positions. It did sort of fix the worst of the Caitlyn problem, where Caitlyn starting at range 4, which meant that there were 3 spaces in between, and you could only get to range 2 if you dashed because there's wormhole in the middle, was really awful. And if you didn't do that, you just lose. So that sort of, I don't know if it fixed Caitlyn, but it helped. It meant that you didn't necessarily have to dash beat 1, though you probably wanted to anyways. That was pretty relevant.
Yeah, I think the answer to this is the change to starting positions was the balance change. You know what I mean? It's like we did it because we knew it would do these things. Because otherwise, it's also about interesting play, right? Like at the end, I'll always point towards interesting play.
Right.
Because as a OG War veteran, which means I played original War over 200, 100 something times, your starting move was either you dodge or you shot. There was nothing else that you could do. Like you would literally do nothing else. You would dodge or shot. That's it. No other play was viable. Drive sometimes, like if you're a character who has range and also fast stats, like that's very rare, few and far between. Because the thing about it is that you couldn't play drive because burst would ruin you. So you would just shot all the time. And I'm not sure if any of you realize that, but that's not a really fun way to start the game all the time, where it's like you either dodge or you shot, and if you're Hikaru, you're sad. Like
you like it. Hope advancing drive works sometimes.
Well, Hikaru would just do Geomantic Shot. Like that's why Geomantic Shot was so good before, was because it was the only move he could play beat 1. Because if you did anything else, you would lose. But yeah, that's just how it goes. I mean, now Geomantic Drive is way better than Geomantic Shot. So, yeah. Laura, do we have another question?
Yeah. Okay, so you just said, you say Hikaru and I say Hikaru, so sorry.
I still have no idea on how to pronounce that.
Here's the thing. All of the pronunciations are correct. According to Brad, no matter how you pronounce any of the names, it doesn't matter so long as people understand who you mean. So, actually, I mispronounced it. His name is Hikara. So there you go.
No, Goodwin asked, will Evil Hikaru's arrival come with more fixes to cards?
So yeah, when we reprint the promos with BattleCON Unleashed, any promos that are earned, the plan is, update their kits. So Anath, for example, has been updated for BattleCON Online, so she will be rebalanced. And Evil Hikaru, yes, will also be rebalanced when his promos reprinted.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, Laura, more questions, plus.
Okay, how about, so Thiago asked, what was the most difficult character to rebalance in the whole game?
Isn't that Caitlyn?
Caitlyn was pretty rough. Thessala is also being a pain. Well, we need to see how much work she actually needs.
Sorry. I'm sorry. But Thessala?
But I will actually say the character that has been the hardest to do is actually Carolyn, because she's super simple and also super not fun to play against in the matchups that she totally ruins, because her whole ability is do a really basic thing. So get +2 power and +2 stun guard and do it a lot. You know, she can do the same thing up to 3 times in a row, which no other character can really do without taking into account.
Wellesley, I guess.
Yeah, but Wellesley has to hit. You know, there's some kind of gameplay there. Wellesley can theoretically put all of your cards into discard 2 if she really wants. But the thing with Carolyn is that when you run into an issue where, for example, her can't be moved ability, like the weird side thing on one of her cards, or her
exoskeleton,
on an exoskeletal, or whips auto stun at range 1. If you're playing against Eligor, for example, the only real play that you have to do in that matchup is use whip as many times as possible, because there aren't that many things he can do about it. You just
it's like
auto stun,
like whip mutating bladed or something like that.
Yeah, throw overload in there sometimes to copy whip. So it's just really awkward. And so we have some things that we want to work on with her, but the problem is that any sort of game health changes make her more complicated, which is a little sad because it makes her design a lot less elegant, but it really does seem like it's necessary to sort of fix the fact that she can either get locked out or totally lock characters out of the game. She's also a little bit underpowered right now, but because her prio spread is terrible, and that means that she's really easy to clash out. So,
and if you clash out of Carolyn, and remember that all of her stats are disjointed, right? Like, she has no range outside of whip, because she can repeatedly use whip. So the moment you clash one of her cards out, she literally can't do anything to hit you anymore because she has no more range. Like, if you clashed out her drive and her shots in this card, she misses instantly, and that's how she loses almost every single game.
Right. So that's why she's been a tough character to work on. We're getting there, but she still needs work.
Thanks for, because when she comes to BCO, I'm going to become a Carolyn one trick, and she's going to be the only character I ever play. So
seems solid.
Oh, yeah. What made you attracted to Carolyn?
I just really like her character design. I know nothing about what she does. I just like the way she looks. So.
Oh, what she does is that she makes 3-card attack pairs. That's her thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So like the style she played last beat gets applied to the attack she's playing on this beat.
That's kind
of she gets 3-card attacks.
Yep, it's pretty good.
Do it good.
Okay.
Okay, and I missed this one way up here, but Goodwin also asked, will Descent be nerfed?
Oh, so Descent is Berman's.
Can you tell me what Descent is?
Yeah, Descent is, I believe, Berman's alpha finisher, Dragon's Descent.
Oh. No, I think it's his beta finisher.
Is it his beta? Alpha Dragon Flare? All right. It's his finisher, Dragon's Descent. It's 1/2 opponents who didn't move can't hit you, and before activating, just teleport directly adjacent to the opponent and punch them for 8. It's really good. Yeah. One of the things about Berman is that Berman has good finishers. He is sort of supposed to have good finishers.
Yeah.
Descent will probably be nerfed. I don't know how severely. I would not be surprised if it loses a point or 2 of power, and that's it. But it's still going to be really good. That said, it is something that we're actively looking at because, again, it is a card that can be not super fun to play against. But so there are options like reduce the priority on it so that Burst might be able to beat it. So we're looking at it. We're going to see. It will probably be nerfed a little bit, but I can't promise how much.
Yeah, I think one thing we have to... I think this points out another thing about balance that tends to be a problem, especially when newbies in the Discord start talking about what they feel about overall game balance. And it's that they are sad when they pick a character whose finishers aren't good. So I think we have to point out the fact that a finisher is part of a character's kit, right? So if you look at like what people tend to do is they go, Dragon's Descent. Schecter's Coffin Nails. Why is this significantly worse? And I'm like, you have to understand that they're part of a bigger kit, right? And it just tends to play into that. Like the reason why Schecter's finishers are bad is because Schecter's entire deal is if you're in a situation wherein you have to use your finisher to win, you deserve to lose. Like that's the point of Schecter. If you didn't play Schecter right, you don't deserve to suddenly win because you have a good finisher. On the other hand, like if you're somebody like Berman who's always slow and always reactive, you're naturally going to be low enough to use your finisher no matter how good you are at Berman, because that's just how Berman plays.
Yeah.
He tends to get low. So he needs a way to punish people who get him low really fast. Like that's just the ultimate end of it.
It's It's also worth noting that the strength of Dragon's Descent is also heavily tied to the strength of War Mages, in that it's only really good if he can corner himself and then push you really far so you can't dodge it, or if your drive misses. And the best way that he does that is War Mages. So we also sort of are looking at War Mages in general, making sure that it's, nice, balanced, and reasonable. And so it's
probably one of the best styles in the game.
It's really good. And just making sure that, he doesn't get to set up his finisher for free every time.
But I think that's a good newbie test, right? Like if you ask someone to look at Berman and they I fell into this trap too, but like when you ask somebody to look at Berman and they think that War Mages isn't a good style, you probably can ascertain that they're not really that high level in the game just yet, right? Like I fell into this trap a long time ago when I first saw Berman, and I was like, why would I play War Mages when I can just play all of these things with stats? But then I realized that if you play War Mages, you win 3 beats or something. So
yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, it's really good. Like a master costume for you, Lady Kimberly, that's like her original artwork. That's like her original artwork. This isn't balance related, but just wait for more Kimbe costumes because they're fun. All of them are really fun. Laura, do we have more questions?
Yeah, I really like this question from Jason, which is, when or how do you know when rebalancing style to change either numbers or triggers?
It's always kind of a toss-up. So like I said, power is probably the easiest number to sort of know what's going on, right? If you have 3 power or 4 or +1 or +2 or +0 on a style, you can kind of take a guess at it and see how it's going to play. Triggers are a lot more complicated, but because they're a lot more complicated, they're also a lot easier to mess with, right? So triggers, we have a lot more leeway when we're changing things around. We can add conditionals, we can make them cost something, we can make them, give you 2 things instead of 1. So like one of the big changes in BCO that we made was combination. Instead of giving +2 power, if you hit them last speed, it now gives +1 power and +1 prio. And it's a minor change, but it really does change sort of the feel of the card. So triggers are easy. We can mess with those.
Stats.
Yeah.
You mean stats?
No, triggers. If we're changing an effect, we have a lot more nuance. We have a lot more ability to play with it. A +2 power style is, unless it has a huge drawback, it's just always going to be good.
Yeah.
When you're throwing a stat at something, that means that if you're playing it, it's probably just gonna win. If the stats are big enough. I know someone asked a question earlier, could you balance an 8 power attack or 8 power style?
That's easier too.
And the answer is you probably could balance it, but I don't know how you would balance it without making it incredibly coin flippy. Where it's like either it works or it doesn't. And
it's either it works or it ruins you, right? Like
it's not even just that. If you had a card that was, this attack has 8 power, and on hit you take the damage or something. You mirror the damage. That might be balanced win rate wise, but some characters want the game to end quickly, and some characters want the game to end slowly. There's going to be times where it breaks something.
Yeah.
So stats are hard because they tend to have huge effects, and even like going from +1 prio to +2 prio or +2 prio to +3 prio on a style is really major. Triggers, we have a lot of nuance. If we can change triggers, we tend to prefer to. Something like what we did with Eric, where we shaved 1 power off of, I believe, 3 of the styles, is a huge power level change.
Yeah.
Are there, when you look at something like that, like, okay, we know that we need to take a look at Mikhail, all right? And you're looking at a specific card of his. I don't know why I picked him of all characters. Sure. But sure, we're going to look at Mikhail. If you look at a card, are there certain characters who you would say, like, well, since this is Mikhail, we'll look at changing a trigger before changing a stat? Like, is that ever...
Yeah, so for example, Mikhail's a character. He's a heavyweight, right? So he has high power. So we would want to keep his power high if possible. He's allowed to have low prio and probably should have low prio. So that's fine. He's allowed to have good stun guard or stun immunity. That's fine. If you're changing and his ranges, because he's a control mid-rangey character, those are okay. If you want to change him, you probably don't want to reduce necessarily his power, if possible, unless that's a major problem. But when we buffed Mikhail, specifically for BCO, because he was a little bit weak on paper, one thing that we did was we added the retreat 1 to Apocalyptic, right? So we gave him an extra effective range on one of his cards, because sort of the whole gimmick that he has is that he has high power and he has a very wide... he wants to be at range. He's supposed to have flexible ranges. So if we're buffing someone like, say, Hikaru, we wouldn't want to necessarily buff his ranges, because his character identity is that his ranges are limited, but his stats are great. Okay. So that's where that comes out of. Yeah.
Sorry, somebody in chat asked, are the cadenza changes going to make it to PaperCon?
The plan is that PaperCon should follow BCO. So the plan is yes. There has been a bunch of talk about whether cadenza in the full meta as opposed to the BCO meta merits the nerf to hydraulic specifically, and I can't say that for sure. I know we would want to revert it in BCO if we revert it on paper, probably. But that's kind of complex, because that ends up being a newbie friendliness question.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
But ultimately, it's probably going to work out, because we're probably going to nerf some of his worst matchups, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Most of Cadenza's worst matchups are getting nerfed a lot worse than he is. So he should be all right. Cadenza will live.
All right, so we're nearing time. We have 20 minutes left. So when we answer, let's be a bit faster so that we can finish these questions, because there's a lot more.
Go for it.
Laura, let's go.
Okay.
Rapid fire us.
This one, on a similar note, because I'm guessing he means similar to what we were just talking about. When do you know if a character needs more or less movement, such as the sweeping change, for example?
Good example, the match that I played against Marco yesterday, where if it feels like a character is just terrible at range, then they probably want some kind of limited movement. Characters should function. If you see them a lot getting just completely stuck at range, they want more movement. If they're always next to you and it feels like the counterplay just isn't there, they probably should have less.
Yeah.
Also,
I won that game. Yeah. The only reason I won that game was because John just deals 7 damage per hit.
John punches good.
John punch good. All right. More questions.
Okay, so Nate up here also asked, what's the procedure for playtesting? So is there a particular set of characters you play against?
We do have a gauntlet specifically of a couple different characters. It is seen somewhat less use, because one of the problems is always kind of, UA versus UA issues. But in general, we kind of just play games and try and play against a range of opponents, and then take feedback, take it from there. Basically, play games, see what feels bad, see what feels good, collect win rate data, and collect player experience data.
So, with people in our community that are helping out with play testing, do we give them specific instruction, hey, play this character against any of these 5, or do you just say we need more testing on this person?
Sometimes, but often it's just more testing, because more testing is always good and a little easier to get.
Sure.
Yeah. But if people are asking for a specific thing, when it comes to a certain set of characters, it's less about balancing them and more about designing them in the first place.
Yeah.
So if you're making a custom character, there tends to be a gauntlet of characters that you have to fight through to make sure that they function. That's the thing. You need to make sure. Yeah, the initial creation, you need to make sure that they work. So if you make a character, you usually gauntlet them versus Cadenza, and then against Rukyuk, against Sagas, and against Hikaru or something like that.
Yeah, things
just to make sure that these characters can function against those archetypes. Because you don't want to make a character who insta loses or insta wins against any of those. And that's really just a cursory look, just a general swath of this character is not going to break the game entirely in half. So it's just going to be more about fine-tuning later on.
Right.
Okay.
More questions, please.
You said the word archetype, so I'm going to ask from Luke, is there an archetype that's trickiest to balance?
Oh.
The archetypes that tend to be trickiest are hard control characters, especially ones that mess with stats a lot. So characters that are good at negating enemy stuff in general are hard to balance, and actually also big dumb heavies, because they tend to either be like impossible to play against or really overwhelming. One change that we tested that was in BCO for a bit that we totally broke the game on was giving Caesar an extra range on suppression that was around for a patch, and it just like the game wasn't fun anymore for anyone playing against Caesar, because you would get stuck in the corner and he would just hit you with it for free and you would take 7. So that's the kind of thing where it's like any character that has opponent limiting stuff or does ridiculous damage with the drawback of mobility or something, those both tend to be a pain to balance.
Yeah. Also, the problem with big dumb heavies is that usually they're like Carolyn, right? So if they're good, the problem is if you nerf something, it nerfs basically the entire character, right? Like if you reduce a stat, it basically just ruins the entire character. Like just look at Cadenza, right? Like it changes so much about the character because so much of their character is tied to the stat.
Yeah.
Unlike control, this is why I think controllers are actually easier to balance, because they can afford to have like 20 something triggered effects on something, and you just remove some of the triggered effects, make some of them more niche, and then that's easier to balance.
Yeah,
because,
that definitely
it still feels like they're a control character. It's just that they have more conditions, which is good for a control character. But for a Juggernaut or some dumb heavy, you either have to reduce the stats or give them triggered effects that modify their stats, and that just ruins or detracts from the character in some way. So it's going to be hard.
I would have never
more questions.
That. Okay, Nate asked, and I know you answered the first half of this already, but the second half is, how about have you had a character that had interesting counterplay but wasn't very enjoyable to play as?
So it's actually an interesting story, which you'll be seeing more of in Wanderers, is the character Daigen that Charles designed. His whole UA is that he gives the opponent 6 wishes. And his styles were, for a long time, just kind of a blob of stats that all kind of looked like +0 to 2, +2, +2. So, which is nice. I wouldn't be sad about a character playing character with +0 to 2, +2, +2. But the counterplay was entirely on the opponent, right? He just sort of does stuff, and the opponent is forced to use these wishes in order to beat him. Yeah. And that runs into a situation where your character doesn't feel great. You have no game plan that you're working towards. And that's why we've sort of been working on Dajin in particular. But that, it's not an unheard of situation. Usually the characters that are really interesting, where your opponent has a lot of counterplay, are characters like Melandrax, where you can control certain spaces and the opponent wants to stay out of those spaces, the space in the middle and the 2 corners, for example, for Melandrax. But when you tend to have a character with a drawback UA or a UA with huge holes in it, unless your character has a very specific game plan, like for Alexian or Mikhail, they're wanting to get to range and then run back in, your character tends to just not be that interesting. So we've wanted to stay away from that. A couple of the Wanderers had that issue and we've been working on cleaning it up.
Like Feilana? Oh my gosh.
Feilana, Rin sometimes, but we're working on it.
Rin most of the time, gosh.
Cool. This should be a quick one, also from Nate. Do you collect data on which styles or attack pairs are heavily used in BCO?
We do. Yes. It is a little bit limited, but we do it as part of the AI tuning, which I know we're still working on. I only have access to some of it because we're doing kind of a rework on that part of the back end. But generally, yes, we do have that data, and I'm trying to get more info out of it. A lot of it I can sort of tell from player feedback and playing the characters, but we definitely have that data.
So that's how even I know that Cadenza plays Clockwork Shot.
Clockwork Shot is definitely a pair that is played sometimes.
I mean, but once you get high level Cadenza, you do Clockwork Strikes.
Oh, that's intense. Okay, let's see. Corpus asked, of the characters rebalanced for Devastation, did one stand out as the most fun or satisfying to rework? If so, who was it?
I'm leaning on Caitlyn again on this one. Yeah. I did a lot of work on her. I found her a lot of fun, and actually also Alexian, because Alexian was probably in the bottom 3 characters in the game before BCO happened, and has been buffed massively since, and is now actually pretty fun to play and play against, and a lot of people really like him. So Yeah, he was a lot of fun to work on.
Yeah. For me, I guess it's just the characters I played. Like ultimately, when it comes to playtesting, you stick to a few characters. I really like the Joel change. I don't know. I just felt like this is what Joel should have always been.
Yeah.
Somebody asks here in the chat though, very quick, will Demetros get new dodge counters?
Good question. The answer to that is I don't know. And the reason is that Demetros is a speedster. So when Demetros when it's too free for him to hit you, he's just super not fun to play against.
Yeah.
We spoke about this a little bit last week, where it's jousting Deathblow, for example, if your burst is down, is a guaranteed hit. And we don't always know if that's healthy gameplay. My sort of ideal vision for Demetros, because I really honestly don't like playing Demetros that much, is making the decision of whether to anti-crescendo more interesting. And
the answer to that is currently no, right?
The answer to that is
it's not a decision.
Deathblow. It's it's never worth anti-crescendo, basically. And I don't know how that'll pan out. There's players who are much better at Demetros than me and are a lot more invested in him that are putting thoughts on it. I know Tank Bard has been testing him a bunch, and we have some ideas on possibly giving him a little bit more of a safety net if he gets really low, which would also help you with the anti-ing potential.
Yeah.
In which case, no, he doesn't need a dodge counter because he still generates 50-50s every beat where he can hit you and not get hit back. And that would make the gameplay more interesting and a lot more so than having a dodge counter. And honestly, I still kind of feel that a lot of the characters that could outspeed Dash, that was kind of a crutch, if that makes sense. Like for Schecter, Schecter was already good. The ability to outspeed Dash wasn't really strictly necessary for her to be a fun or interesting character, and it just felt miserable for the opponent. So, after we tested her with Dodge a bunch, she was still a pretty, healthy and solid character.
Yeah. I think overall the problem with Demetros isn't the fact that he doesn't have dodge counters anymore. It's that he can't stun people anymore. Like, I don't know whether it's like power creep or stun guard creep or like just having stun guard
he definitely suffered a bit from forced stun guard. And
I think it's more of the forced stun guard than the dodge. You know what I mean? It's like people keep looking at the dodge. It's like, oh no, I can't get my death blow to work anymore. And I'm like, you lose nothing. Like death blow is not a commitment. Your opponent dodges your death blow, then don't spend any counters. Don't spend any tokens.
Losing his Prio 3 stun, if they can anti-force stun guard, is also a little bit rough on him. Or force Prio. Yeah. So he definitely got hurt by force gauge, which is one of the reasons that we're looking at him. But I think the dash counter was definitely one of the least interesting parts of his kit in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Okay, more questions. Oh no, we only have 10 minutes left. Okay, we only have 3 questions left.
Nate asked, have you ever had a character that was so much fun you had a hard time bringing yourself to change their stats or tweak their abilities?
So this is a complete tangent, but this is actually an Exceed answer that I want to say for a moment, which not a BattleCon answer.
Gosh.
But
okay.
For a moment, we had a character in Exceed that Brad put in an ability which was on hit, the opponent reverts from their Exceed mode back to their normal mode.
Oh, was this Galdred?
No, it was one of Renea's.
Oh my gosh! What?
Abilities like that are like really silly and really fun also tend to like need to get nerfed because they're miserable to play against and tend to break specific characters. We ended up removing that from the game because it was the fun of it wasn't actually worth the giant headache that it created. Yeah. I don't think we've had that yet in BattleCon. That's like the one that I can definitely think of. But some things just have to get cut sometimes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Well, that's got to be hard when you're trying to put a different flavor and a different feel into every character. I'm sure there are sometimes abilities that get put in there just for like character's sake, and then like later you have to change it, and that probably is sad.
Yeah,
it's true. I mean, we put effects in the game just because we think they're cool, right? Like, there's no reason that Cadenza should get Stun Guard Infinity when he does the Iron Body, but we do it because it's funner than having Stun Guard 20, right?
Yeah, numbers are nice.
Numbers are nice. All right, more questions?
Okay, we got our last one from Jason down here. Specific question for a specific character. What are the current thoughts on removing Hepzibah's Corruption Dark Pact instead of altering it?
Cool. So yeah, corruption is the Dark Pact that allows her to ignore Stun Guard. So basically, the thoughts on corruption Dark Pact are the same as what we spoke about with Evil Hikaru earlier, and Benvir earlier, where it's if you can lock the opponent out of playing for multiple beats in a row, it tends to be an issue. So that's corruption is definitely an issue versus heavyweights. We've been thinking for a bit about whether we want to or she should get a replacement Dark Pact for it. We honestly haven't found a really good option yet. But ignore Stun Guard in general. I know we changed it to -3 power on a lot of cards. For example, on we changed it on Gerard's Mercenary for the same reason, where it's like it's been a change in a lot of things. Where if you have
Binding Knife has that, right?
Yeah, if you have, I think it's -2 on Binding Knife because it also has another ability. But
because it's pretty good.
If you have a character with good stats, it's not really great if the opponent also doesn't get to play on top of that.
Welcome to Otavia and Eric.
Yeah. So basically that's why we nerfed corruption, because you would get into weird situations where she doesn't even really have to do anything. She just has to spend the one life and lock you out for the rest of the game just by hitting you over and over again. And it's not like Hepzibah has trouble hitting you.
No, she has good range.
She's a mage. She has great range and hit confirm.
Yeah. Well, her movement's lacking. I think that's all of our questions. There's one more question in chat. Are cards like Mimic going to be changed to make the rules burden easier? This is very interesting. I want to know about this because I hate the templating on Mimic so much.
We do have an alternate templating. So Mimic's ability is, as written, whenever the opponent advances or retreats, you move the same direction, maintaining distance if possible. Simultaneously, the magic word. So sometimes, the majority of the time, that makes sense. Like, you go one way, Seth goes the same way, and everything works out okay.
You don't switch sides.
You don't switch sides, yeah. The problem is whenever there's like a movement block or a corner or all sorts of weird stuff going on where, so for example, like if you are Lixis and you have her opponents can't move into spaces next to you style, and you retreat, does Seth move into the space next to you? Is he even next to you if he's moving simultaneously? Like, there's weird things. So we have a template which is basically if you advance, he retreats first. If you retreat, he advances first, which helps, or he advances after, which helps a little bit, but is still kind of messy. So yes, we'd like to. We want to clear up the rules whenever possible. There's been some chatter today about how to deal with things like Carolyn and Wellesley if there's multiple styles in a discard, how that works. But yeah, we'd like to. I can't say for sure how yet, but templating in general is something that we want to fix across the board.
What character was that for? The Mimic?
Seth.
Yeah.
Oh.
I also don't know if or when Seth is coming to BCO. He's like way at the end of the line because he's very complicated.
Because of Mimic. Just Mimic, though. Like, it is just Mimic, right? Like, all of the other cards are fine, and all his anti-thing is fine, right? Like...
His anti-thing has like some UI issues, but it's probably doable. Mimic is the worst offender for sure.
Yeah, definitely, right. Somebody just asked literally, is there any plan to just tidy up the templating for the whole game in general?
Yes. It's already in progress. Movement in general is a bit clunky, and so one thing that we've done in BCO is we made it so that can't advance means can't move into spaces, in front of you, and can't retreat can't move into spaces behind you, which definitely messes with a lot of move directly expectations, and it tends to confuse a bunch of experienced players, but not be too confusing for new players, actually, because it's a little clear that like a retreat is anything away and not just the specific ability called retreat. But yes, we'd like to clean up templating. We definitely want to clean up movement, and I think we're well on our way there, because movement is where a lot of the crazy corner issues come from. We kind of have provisional rulings on the 1 or 2 infinite combos in the game, and we've removed a couple of the infinites. So we removed all of the Voco infinites when we fixed Metal or Monster.
Voco purposely takes 1,000 damage against Kaja. Kaja generates 1,000 insects.
Notably, he can also give Burgundy infinite power.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's something you want to do.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think that's one thing I want to point out as well. It's like we should probably just clean up and make sure that all the characters that say attacks at range X don't hit you. Also, like there's attacks at range X don't hit you, opponents at range X don't hit you. It's like
so that's actually
should all just be the same.
That's actually a really complicated thing because attacks is more thematic, but opponents works a lot better when you're dealing with components. So right now, opponents is the one that you use when there's like you're blocking the opponent with an attack or with something like teleport. You know, the opponents with the gate trap in between you and them don't hit you.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird that, for example, for like the 3 or 4 cards in the game that it matters, they would have...
Like when you're playing Fearless or Howling or something like that.
Yeah, I think Fearless, Howling, Laser, and literally everything Burgundy plays are the corner cases. And it's weird now because Burgundy is so, it matters a lot for all of the Burgundy things, right? If you say opponents, then it's a lot worse against Burgundy. If you say attacks, it's a lot. Or if you say opponents, it's a lot better against Burgundy. If you say attacks, then he can always just pick a new source. So it's weird. We haven't really found a good answer to that yet. Opponents is the cleaner one.
Yeah, I think I just got really offended by this in BattleCon Online, where where Kadat's gate trap hit somebody at range 1 playing Implosion. Like that just offended me so much because it's like that's not how it's supposed to work. Even what?
So actually, Thiago mentioned Gaspar, but Gaspar's attacks are both opponents and attacks from the clone. So those actually don't work differently.
Can we not? Oh my gosh! See, this is why I hate this character. His markers are opponents, but only sometimes. Like
that pains me.
It hurts.
It hurts.
A lot of stuff will be changed on Gaspar. He'll just be, not a nightmare. But that offended me a lot.
I'll see if we can get Dan Z to write an article about changing Gaspar to make him not die to Force Prio.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, poor Gaspar. Because his clones don't get the Force Prio. That's the big problem, right?
Yeah, it's rough.
It's rough. But yeah, so stuff like that, like weird corner cases wherein, if it says attacks or opponents and then your attack has range X, then you don't hit, blah blah blah. I mean, that really needs some templating.
Yeah, it's really only for mechanically. This really only should be right now for the attacks that calculate their range from a marker. So Fearless, Howling, Laser, and Burgundy's UA. Everything else should work normally. X's, for example, should be X.
Really? Wait. But then why did Implosion work? Why didn't Implosion work? Oh no, Daniel, something's horribly wrong. Because in BZO,
that may be
somebody got hit by
that may be a bug.
Somebody got hit by dimensional. Somebody played Implosion, and Kadath was at range 1. Kadath played Dimensional Exile and still hit.
That may be a bug. I know we're working on some X range things.
You have lost me.
Okay, so it's not supposed to work that way?
I believe no.
Okay, Daniel Z, you're in my books. You're in my books with that X ruling.
You've been shenanigans.
You've been shenanigan. All right, so that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, all of you watchers. And if you're watching this on the VOD, please tell us what you thought about this video in the comment section down below. If you have more questions, please type them in the comment section down below as well, because Marco or Daniel will try to answer to the best of their abilities. Maybe Laura,
Not me.
All right. Yeah. Oh, by the way, before we end, somebody asked a question that only Laura can answer. Will you be releasing some PNP tuck boxes for this?
I technically can't answer that.
Yeah, that's technically a Brad question.
I can say if Brad tells me to make them, then yes.
Okay.
But I have not been told to make them yet.
All right, sure. All right, so thank you so much for watching our live stream for BattleCon Unleashed, balanced with Andoril. As usual, that's been me, your host, Marco Dos Santos, also known as Mechanic Critic, also known as Emanakami, also known as some random Asian boy. And with me has been my 2 wonderful, wonderful guests and other hosts. We'll start with the girl with the hair.
I am Laura Levita. Thanks for joining.
All right. And with us has been the main guest of honor, Balance Man, God Lord himself.
Hey, this is Daniel Honig, and thank you for watching.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget your special action. And thank you, World of Indians. Thank you, and good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Happy gaming.